Hello, lovely people. Welcome back. And this is a very unexpectedly sunny afternoon. So I'm making the most of the spare hour that I have. I was thinking this week, as you do, about how I think I'm now coming up on my 5th full year of knitting. Where the time has gone, I don't know. But I think it must have been around this time in 2022 because it was definitely during one of the COVID lockdowns when I first decided to properly learn. I did know how to knit at a most basic level from being a kid, but I'd never really made anything, and I'd definitely not made anything in the last probably 10 or more years, 12 years maybe. So it had been a very long time. But I thought in sort of celebration of my maybe 5th anniversary of being an obsessive knitter, I might sit down and do a little roundup of all of the current pieces that I have in my wardrobe, which are hand knit. So as far as I can establish, I don't have any pieces pre-2022, which I currently wear. I know I was definitely making things, but I think at that time it was kind of more intermittent and I wasn't necessarily always having a project on the go at all times. And I think a lot of the ones that I did were either probably gifts or I just have ended up not keeping. They haven't worn, I haven't liked them, I've frogged them, whatever. So I think there's a lot in that which has kind of been lost, fortunately, unfortunately. But I do actually have 14 pieces, I counted, which I currently wear, which I think is pretty good going, especially just for the last 3-ish years, you know? And I think a lot of the things that I even knit in that time were definitely learning experiences. And a lot of them were gift knits as well. And there were also lots of accessories. And to clarify, I think today I'm only going to chat about the kind of wearable clothing items instead of accessories because honestly, there could be a lot. Apparently, I have 73 projects on Ravelry since I started logging my projects in sort of this time in 2022. I think it was April. So there is a lot on there, but not everything is even exists anymore, do you know? And lots of them were given away and lots of them have just been worn out and repurposed and things like that. So yeah, I'm going to focus on the 14 which I currently have, which are in my rotation of clothing at the minute. And there will definitely be some things in here that if you've watched any of the previous podcast episodes, you've seen because apparently since the start of this year, I've really just been turning stuff around. I just didn't realize at the rate at which I had been finishing projects, but actually I'm doing pretty well. I'm also really struggling today because I think I may have given myself an injury doing what I don't know, probably just like sleeping or something pathetic, but I really can't move my neck. So if I look a bit like a robot, that's why, because I'm kind of having to do this instead of turning my head, which is not ideal. So starting off strong, I think it's only right to start at the very beginning because this is the first project which I have recorded on Ravelry with all the details and everything. And I'm a pretty avid Ravelry user, so everything I use is logged and all the specs and details of every project are pretty much logged. And usually photos as well, unless I've really like fallen out of the habit of it. But this was the first real garment that I made, which is the off-grid sweater by Rose Knitwear. And I think it might be quite hard to see the full shape of it in this shot, but hopefully you can get an idea. This was finished in April 22 and I made it out of Drops Alaska. Now, I will say that this is an ambitious beginner project, but I absolutely don't regret any of it because I still wear it to death and I have done consistently in the last 3 years since I've owned it. So I think it was so worthwhile. I had a great time doing it. Apparently I finished it in 5 weeks, which is kind of insane because this thing has over 1,800 meters of yarn, which for a standard jumper is a lot. And I feel like I only finished it because at the time I probably had no frame of reference for how long or what quantities of yarn a normal jumper should take, because that's definitely not it. I think if I were looking at that now, I might even be put off by the fact that it's such a mammoth project. But I'm very, very glad of it. It's one of my most worn pieces. It's the warmest, chunkiest, most stunning stitch pattern as well. I would recommend this pattern to anyone who's thinking of it because I just think it's so interesting and creative. I think it was definitely my first time following a proper pattern, and I probably just got lucky that the way Rose Knitwear writes is actually quite good for absolute beginners, I think. There tends to be every row written out explicitly stitch by stitch, which I think now I don't necessarily love, but at the time I probably found it quite easy to follow because I think if it wasn't, this sort of slip stitch motif would probably be really, really hard to understand as a beginner if it weren't written out stitch by stitch. Do you know what I mean? There are some issues with this. I have made a few modifications in the time since I finished it. I remember certainly taking off a couple of pattern repeats on the neck because it was very, very high, and also on the arms because they're quite long. I'd say the sizing on this is enormous, so I think this is probably only the second size, and it really drowns me. And I'm usually a third size wearer in most things. I also, because I didn't know anything about the construction of a sweater, I was knitting this in the round, bottom up. So obviously, because it's drop shoulder, you reach the underarms and then split to work the front and back yoke flat. In a striped pattern, this means that you actually end up with quite a lot of ends. And this would be one of the only flaws to this pattern, I'd probably say, because the way I chose to deal with them was not necessarily how someone with experience would. And this is what the inside currently looks like. I thought it was a good idea, apparently, just to sort of knot everything off and cut it. And frankly, I'm so lucky that I picked a yarn that could feld, because if I didn't, it probably would have just unraveled and it wouldn't be in one piece now. But actually, it's lasted remarkably well, even given my lack of technical knowledge or care to even do some research into what you're supposed to do with a million ends. I think at this time I didn't really know about the concept of weaving things in, so it was very much just knot it and cut it and move on with life, you know. And it's come back to bite me in other garments, but not in this one, fortunately. So as long as I'm happy to just overlook the mess that's the inside of the armholes, I really don't have many issues with this, and I'm still really proud of it and wear it a lot. I did forget to add that these are kind of all in a bit of a random order. I thought about breaking them down, but to be honest, I have a lot more jumper sweater pullovers than anything else. So I've kind of done things in a very random order. They're not in chronological order or really grouped by project. They're just in the order in which they were stacked when I took them out of the wardrobe. So do with that what you will. Next up is a recent finished project, which is my sweater number 9 by My Favourite Things Knitwear. I'm going to do both my Favourite Things Knitwear pieces next to each other now. And this was finished just in February this year using Drops Nepal and Drops Kid Silk, which had been frogged from a previous project. And actually, I'm really, really happy with the way it turned out. Actually, holding these up, I realise this is quite similar to the last one, but I don't really own that many mock neck jumpers. I think it's just those two. So it was incredibly quick to finish because it's got such a wide gauge. It's using an Aran yarn, but I think it's knit on like, oh God, don't look at how uneven that is. I'll come back to that in a second. I think it's knit on 6 or 7 millimeter needles, so it's quite large and quite open, but I do find that the yarn just sort of expands to fill the space available. So it's not especially gappy or breezy, which is great. And honestly, it was just a really great use of yarn from a project which I wasn't wearing anymore, which was kind of dragging me down because I was looking at it and thinking it was a shame that it wasn't being used for something that was a bit more productive. So it's very valuable in that regard. Going back to the kind of uneven texture, I don't think it's horrific, but I do wish I had properly steamed or set the frogged yarn before I started working this up. It was difficult really because I was frogging it with the mohair, and the tension of each strand is so different, it can be quite hard to set that yarn properly. And it did give it a good block and it worked out pretty well, and I do usually set any frogged yarns so that they don't have all the kind of kinks in them from when you unravel them. But just with this one, really I just wanted something that was going to be quick and I couldn't be bothered, quite frankly. And my Favourite Things Knitwear pattern is this wonderful sweater number 26. which I finished in October 2023. And this was actually knit up in 3 different yarns. No, 4 different yarns, which I picked up when I was in Copenhagen, I think the summer of that year. So this uses Sandnes Double Sunday and Sandnes Sunday held with Malabrigo Mechita for the dark green stripe. And then both of those are held with what I think is probably a dropped kid silk mohair. I'm not too sure. But I'm actually still so pleased with this garment, even though I feel like I have improved quite a lot in the time since I finished it. And there are some things that I would do differently, but they really don't bother me as much as I thought they would. I think that's one of my big takeaways from this is that I think I'm quite a perfectionist person in my projects, but I do forget that a lot of my old pieces I still wear to death, even if I can see that there are mistakes or things that I would have done differently in them. And actually, it doesn't bother me as much as I think it will in the moment. So I think, if anything, that's a good learning point to just move on from mistakes that are not significant, because I sort of can rely on the fact that I'm definitely not going to notice them in the future, even though that might be what I'm fixating on now. So hopefully you can see the amazing variety of colour in the dark green stripes there, which is caused by the Malabrigo yarn. I believe it's the colourway called Selva, and honestly, I just think it's stunning. Definitely going to use this technique again. And this is the first time actually that I tried a saddle shoulder construction. I think it might have been the first time of me doing a construction which wasn't drop shoulder at all, actually. And it did turn out remarkably well, even with negotiating the kind of 2-row stripes and the short rows, which took a bit of maths. But I thought, again, as with all my favourite things patterns, I just think they're really well written and easy to follow, and they're good staples. And they're nice because you can get very creative if you want to do interesting colours or patterns, because they are all quite neutral and in that classic Scandinavian style, you know. But I feel like there is a lot of breadth for experimentation in them as well. I do know that this was definitely way off gauge because I really can't remember what needles I'd used, and I don't really remember much about the pattern, but I did have to take off length from the body and the sleeves. And even now, the shoulders are very, very, very broad, but I find that it drapes and sits really nicely when it's on. So actually, I love the fit of it, even though it might not be what the pattern intended. And so next up, I do have a pair of projects, but one of which I am wearing at the moment. I am a bit of a chronic pattern repeater, and if I like a pattern, I'm going to make it twice. So there's a few instances of this so far, and probably more to come, because I just think if it ain't broke, you know. And often I like having knit a pattern once and knowing what I might change or what I might do differently. I feel like it's actually quite satisfying for me. I don't get especially bored, you know, knitting the same thing multiple times, especially if there's been, you know, some time between them, which there usually has. So these next pair of projects are the Sand Sweaters by Ullin Knitwear. This is the first one, which I realise is quite hard to see on camera what it really looks like. But this was finished in April of 2024 in Jamieson's of Shetland Spindrift, which was actually held double. And I don't know if you can see, but the best thing about this yarn is the fantastic flecks of colour which you get. I don't know how well it's going to show up on camera. I might have to insert a photo that better describes it, but I'd say this is probably the most kind of plain and neutral thing I own. But then it does have those little fibres of colour, which I think are fascinating and kind of make it pop in a way. I think the colourway is called Mirror Dancers. I think the reason I made this one twice was, obviously this being the first iteration, I hadn't really realised how little ease was built into the pattern in comparison with the sample photos. So I think most of the sample photos which are used are in, you know, have quite a bit of positive ease, which isn't actually included in the pattern measurements. And so it's important, I think, to notice that. Probably at this time, it wasn't something that I was considering because I just kind of looked at the measurements and the size and just thought it'll probably fit. But it's something that I'm now aware of that I have to account for if I'm wanting a specific fit of the finished piece. So I do still wear this and I do love it and wear it a lot. And I think it's a great spring jumper because it's a little bit more cropped sort of bracelet length sleeves and a bit more close fitting. And it's really nice and not incredibly warm for, kind of transition seasons in the year. And I think when I finished that and then moved on to this one, I decided to make a bigger size so that I'd have a bit more positive ease. And I believe I also sized up a needle size or two because I was using different yarn to the recommended, but it actually turned out really well. So this second one was finished in August of 2024. And this is using BC Yarn Loch Lomond for the kind of burgundy stripes, and then also Noro Ito for the gradient color stripes. And this one definitely was better executed than the first one. But I also did make some adjustments to it just this week, actually, where this is not easy because I'm wearing it, where I actually changed the bottom hem to a 1x1 rib. And I think actually it's fixed all of my issues that I had with it previously, because it did have a folded hem like this one, but it wasn't quite sitting right on my body, I think. So big fan of that. Much prefer the fit of this now that I've made a couple of tweaks to it. And it's just got legs. It's a really solid, comfy, casual jumper pattern. And I think I hadn't used any Ullin knitwear patterns before this, but I believe I enjoyed it. I can't really remember, but I think it was very well tested and written and executed. So no complaints. Now, the next project is one of two vests, which I currently own. I have very mixed feelings about this, but ultimately I love it and I wear it to death, so I'm not going to complain too much. But this is the Seven Sisters vest by Megan Faith Makes, and this was finished just in October of 2024. So I actually did a test knit for Megan Faith Makes, I think around this time, and this was what I cast on when I finished the test fit. It was for what did I test? The Homestead Sweater Baby, I think it was called. Gorgeous pattern. I believe she's doing an adult version at the moment, so I would definitely recommend that if you like this kind of style of colour work. And I'm definitely going to knit that up whenever it's released. So the only complaints I would have about this, nothing regarding the pattern at all, actually. I think as far as intarsia goes, it's great, it's quick, it's really clear to follow, the charts are very easy, and it's nice in a way that the colour work is only on the front because it means that the back panel is really speedy to get through. So if you're looking for something that you can turn around in a short space of time, it's a great option. I only regret my choice of yarn because this is actually knit in Drops Air, and I'm just not the biggest fan. I've really tried to like it. I think I'd used it once in the past, and I'd be really interested to know if this is a common occurrence with all yarns that are kind of constructed the way that Drops Air is, or if it is particularly this in that it's just bad quality. It wears appallingly, I've found. It goes incredibly flat and lifeless, and it pills. So actually, maybe I should clarify, this is a blown yarn with alpaca around a kind of mesh core. So it's similar to things like Lang Cloud, I think I have never used it myself, but I'm pretty sure that's the same structure. And I just find that it looks stunning when you first finish something, but as soon as it's been worn a few times, the core kind of gets compressed, and so that's why it goes very kind of flat and thin, and it just doesn't look as full and fluffy as it does originally, which I think is the kind of, attractive quality about that type of yarn. And it does pill a lot, which I know is an alpaca thing, but I think it's also just a case of it, having that kind of super fluffy structure. But I do find the pills are very hard to remove, which is the only thing which kind of makes the experience a bit slightly negative. But that being said, I still wear this a lot. It's really warm and soft, and it's just really nice to throw on over shirts or t-shirts or whatever, really. And it goes all year round too because it's sleeveless. I actually did, so this pattern is worked with no ribbing on the armhole cuffs. So what I did actually do was kind of tack the armholes underneath, which gives it this maybe slightly 80s shoulder pad kind of look, but I really like it. Hey, I mean, moving swiftly on to my first real summer knit, actually. I think, in a way, spring and summer knits are the things that I've had the worst luck with, in my experience. I don't really have a huge excuse to wear them because of where I live. And I think a lot of them in the past, probably down to my pattern choices and yarn choices and things, just have not been executed in the way that I would hope. But this is one that I finished in May 2024, which I do still wear a lot, and I'm hoping to now that the weather has warmed up a little bit. This is the Mio Mighty by Park Williams, which is actually done in drops cotton merino. Hopefully you can see. And I really love this. It's such a solid pattern. It's a very classic fitted baby top style. And yeah, it's so inoffensive. I couldn't complain about it. The one change I did make, I think, was just to add a small band of 1x1 rib on the bottom hem to match the sleeves and the collar, because I believe the pattern asks for a rolled hem, but I just wasn't sure. I don't know. I'm just a bit funny about those rolled hems where whenever you move, it like rolls all the way up and then you're sort of wrestling with it. But I found that that completely fixed the problem and it's still a great pattern. I was actually pleasantly surprised at the drops cotton merino, really, because I'd never used a wool merino blend in the past. I know Knit for Olive obviously have the famous one, but this is actually a DK weight, so it was just more appropriate for this pattern. But honestly, it's washed fantastically. I would say I've probably washed this between 5 and 10 times when I was wearing it last summer, and I always machine wash these because that's my one thing with summer knits, is that I want to be able to machine wash it because things need washing so frequently. And this has held up remarkably well. I feel like the yarn hasn't really shown any signs of wear, it's not lost its colour or the finish, and I'm definitely going to use it again because for what it is, it's a really great price as well. And I think hopefully this year I might make another version of this pattern in a slightly more fun colour, because as much as I do wear this and it goes with everything, I'm not really somebody who reaches for grey. So yeah, I do still get the wear out of this, but I think I'd like something a bit more jazzy. Oh my god, now I've just got to wrestle this huge mammoth off the chair. Well, she needs no introduction. This is the Planet Sweater by Laura Dalgard, and this was a very, very recent finished object. This was just from March, just last month. So I will say that if you'd like a full rundown on my experience with this, I do go into more detail in the last podcast episode. And hopefully if you have any queries or, questions and things, that might give you a better insight into this. But all in all, I still love it. I'm still a huge fan. This is worked up in Eastertex Alaphos Lopi and some Let Lopi for odd bits of colour work. And honestly, it's been so good to me. I've probably not, there's probably not been a week where I haven't worn it at least 2 or 3 times in the last month. And it's holding up so well. I really wasn't sure how this yarn would fare in terms of, the fluff and pilling and things. I have found that it's shedding significantly less than it was when I was working it, because I think whenever I was in the process of actually knitting it, there was just fibre everywhere, in the air, on the floor. Like, it does, I would say, shed quite a lot because it is obviously a very, very hairy yarn. But I really haven't been noticing that since I've just been kind of wearing it around the house and things like that. And it also really hasn't pilled significantly. Far less than I would have expected it to for something that's, roving, definitely. And I think if I were to ever use a kind of roving wool again, I'd always reach for this because it's just some of the best quality that I have seen in recent times. Now I'm going to move on to my only cardigan in my wardrobe, which frankly is an appalling fact that must be changed very quickly. And to be fair, it is, because I do have the yarn sat in my basket there to cast on a new cardigan, so it's not going to be by itself for very long. But this is the Traveller's cardigan, again by Ozetta, and did I have something by Ozetta previously, or am I making that up? And this was finished just in January of this year in West Yorkshire Spinners, the Croft Aran and More Drops Kid Silk. And do you know what I will say? This is not my first time making this pattern. I had done a version previously, I think it must have been last year, which didn't turn out quite to plan. Definitely my own fault. I'll hold my hands up. But I'm just really glad that I've had the opportunity to make it again because this is stunning. I think it's a great, just classic crew neck, drop shoulder, oversized cardigan. And I feel like once you've got one of those, you don't need to be looking for different patterns. They're kind of done, you know, and this would be the one that I would always reach for. The West Yorkshire Spinners yarn has held up fantastically. I'd definitely recommend it. I know they make the Croft in Aran and DK, and they have some beautiful kind of variegated speckled colorways as well. But honestly, just the way it's worn has been fantastic. There's been barely any pilling, you know, barely any stretch or anything like that. So I really can't complain at all. Now, next up, we have a nice duo of sweaters, which I have definitely raved about before, and I hope everyone's strapped in because I'm going to do it again. These are the step-by-step sweaters by Florence Miller. And this was the first version which I ever made. And honestly, I cannot say enough good things about that pattern. I just think it's fantastic. Apparently, I finished this in November of 2024. And this was made using Drops Nepal and Drops Kid Silk. And now I do really love the finished kind of mild effect that I ended up with, which was not intentional, because I think when I ordered this yarn online, I thought I was buying the same colour in the mohair and also the Aran weight, but that was not the case. But I can't say I'm mad about it, do you know? I really like the finish, and I'd say that this is actually probably one of my most worn pieces currently. So, as I know I've said before, this pattern is just such an excellent beginner pattern. I was the biggest raglan skeptic for the longest time. I don't know what it was. I think I had a really bad experience a couple of years ago when I tried to follow a purchase pattern from a very well-known designer, which was for a bottom-up stranded colourwork raglan. And the finished garment was just atrocious. And it put me off raglan jumpers for what I thought for life, because I thought that they were just not built for me, that they didn't work for me, they didn't suit me. But I think it was a case that that particular pattern was actually just pretty poor. It had this really fascinating quality where every time you put your arms above your head, the whole yoke would ride up, and then as soon as you put your arms down, you end up with the entire jumper underneath your chin that you have to then rearrange. I couldn't be doing with it. So I would say that this has caused me to regain my faith in a good old raglan, and this is probably one of the most flattering raglans I've ever seen, to be honest. I also think that one of the best things about this pattern, aside from the benefits for beginners in that it's just written really, really excellently if you've never read a knitting pattern before, and it goes into such great detail around all different sections of the pattern and how to approach it and the choices that you might have and things like that. I do think that for slightly more confident knitters, it's just really customizable. And I know that both of my sweater number 20 step-by-step sweaters, I didn't follow the pattern very closely after the yoke because I knew that I wanted a kind of straight sleeve with a wide cuff. So on this one, I've done this wider band of 1x1 rib, which was the same for the collar and the hem as well. Now, the second step-by-step sweater, if you've seen any previous podcasts, you will definitely know this. It's knit up in Noro Ito, and it was finished, I believe, January this year. Yeah. This was actually yarn that was received as a Christmas present because whew, you might have to have a lie down after spending that much money. But I love it to death, and I've worn it so much. And I just made a few slight modifications to this one, most of which were similar to the previous version, but I just changed the cuffs and the finishings for a 2x2 rib with a rolled hem, which is, yeah, pretty perfect, no complaints. My one regret, and this is nothing to do with the pattern at all, but more my decision around the yarn, is that it's quite clear where the rate of the gradient changes. And this is unavoidable if you're working things in the round, and especially for yarns of this style, which have a kind of defined gradient throughout them. I don't know if there's even a word for that. There probably is. But to me, it's just quite obvious when I go from working, you know, more stitches in a round at the bottom part of the yoke to working the sleeves, where the rate is a lot longer. Or sorry, no, where each section of the colours of the yarn are a lot longer. I'm really not explaining this well. And I sort of think I wish I'd have considered that and maybe thought about potentially working something either in flat panels or I don't even know what the options would be. Just something where I could control the appearance of the finished fabric a bit more. But frankly, I am nitpicking. It's such an insignificant factor. It really doesn't bother me. And I still wear this just as much as, any of the others and love it to bits. So I should stop complaining, quite frankly. Now, after this one, we're on to the last two projects. We're almost there. This is only my second summer piece. And this is actually the Knit Diet net top, which I made in July of last year. Now, I wear this a lot. I think it's a great transitional piece. I wear it in all seasons, especially for just nights out and things like that. It's a really, really handy thing to own. And this was knit up in Sashenmeyer Catania, which is a kind of double knit slash sport somewhere in between cotton yarn. And honestly, I think it might be my favorite cotton ever because it just has such a stunning finish that you really can't top. I believe it is a mercerized cotton, but it's really pleasant to work with. It washes really well. The finished fabric is stunning. It doesn't really show the kind of rough wear that some cotton yarns sometimes can, which is really quite lucky to find. And they also have an insane color range of pretty much everything you could imagine. So, go wild. There's endless possibilities. I think this year I would potentially consider making one of these again, but probably not following the pattern very closely. I think I would definitely have space in my wardrobe for one in a lighter color or a more fun, summery color. But I do have some qualms with the pattern, just in the way that it's written. It's incredibly confusing, and not really for any real reason. I think the designer chose to use lots of diagrams, but they're the type of diagram which just isn't necessarily helpful. Actually found them more confusing to try and read it from the diagrams because there was no equivalent in written text. They weren't. It wasn't that the diagrams were there to support what was written. It was more just look at that, do what you will. So I did find that quite confusing, and I think as soon as I got past understanding the construction and maybe casting on for the neckline, I kind of just improvised the rest of it, and I was fortunate that it turned out well. I have to say, the drop stitch stitch pattern type thing is incredibly satisfying. I'd 100% do that again in a heartbeat. There's just something really great about unraveling everything all the way up and then seeing the kind of garment expand. It's brilliant. I'd totally recommend. But I would say that you probably don't need this pattern because it does have a lot of qualities which maybe do make your life a bit harder than they need to be. I would say the only thing I also added was just a small thread of elastic around the neckline because it is designed to have this kind of wide, open sort of boat neckline. But obviously there is no neckband to kind of reinforce that, so it's quite prone to stretching. Probably dependent on the yarn that you're using as well. But I found that just a small strand of elastic doesn't go amiss and sort of fixed the problem for me, to be honest. Now we're on to the last two. First up, we've got my Stockholm slipover by Petite Knit, which was finished in December of 2024. I believe this was my Christmas knit for last year, hence the red. And I mean, it's Petite Knit. Need I say more? You get what you pay for and you know what you're getting, and this is what you get. And I really have no complaints. Well, that's a lie. I do have complaints, but they're not really significant. My only complaint about the pattern would be that I found the armholes to be quite snug. And that's not the first time I've had that experience with the Petite Knit pattern, so it's not something that I'm necessarily surprised by. And it's not something that even stops me from wearing the garment because they're not so snug that they're uncomfortable or that they don't fit properly. It's just probably not the kind of body fit that I'd be going for if I were to make a similar vest again. But do you know what? This was made in Jamieson's of Shetland Spindrift with, I think, a strand of probably dropped kid silk mohair. And the finished fabric is really nice. I was sort of interested to see how the Spindrift would hold with mohair because it is quite a sort of rough, sheepy yarn that tends to hold its own, But actually, it's just got such beautiful drape, and I think I picked it for the color mainly because I was really obsessed with this idea of like a sort of deep cranberry red. And I think it absolutely turned out as I was hoping. So I really have no complaints. I do remember going back to add on a bit of extra length to the body just because that was the only thing that I felt that it was missing. And I don't know which yarn to attribute this to, but when I have been wearing it recently, I've noticed a little bit of colour transfer, mainly around the armholes. And I really couldn't tell you which yarn it is that's doing that, but it might be something to be aware of. I think when things are especially close fitting under the arm, sometimes if you're a little bit warm, it might be quite prone to bleeding. So I did find that there was a shirt which ended up with some red dye on it, but it wasn't exactly hard to get out. And, you know, I'll just be more conscious of it in the future. But it absolutely won't stop me from wearing this, and I do still enjoy it a lot. And now the last piece is a biggie. So this here is my Flower Power pullover by Lindsay Deegan. I finished this in October of 2024, and this is using 2 strands of Drops alpaca for the yarn. Now, this is the definition of a love-hate relationship because I hated the process of making this. And that's not like me to say things so strongly, but I really did. I think it took me about 6 months to finish, and I was so excited to start it. And really, you know, if I'm that invested in a project and a pattern, it doesn't take me that long. But the process was so unpleasant. It was just, I have a whole essay, I think, in the comments of my Ravelry project on this. If anyone's interested in thinking about knitting it themselves, I'd recommend it. I'd also recommend reading other people's comments on the other projects underneath that pattern in Ravelry, because they will hopefully influence your decision. Now, I can criticize it all I like. I love it to bits. I wear it all the time. It's worn excellently. I think it really holds up, and it's just a gorgeous pattern. That's why I was so committed to finishing it. And now that I have it in a finished piece that I can now own and I don't have to think about picking up and working on, I'm loving it a lot more. So a lot of my issues are partially my own fault because I did not do enough research into 100% alpaca yarn. I've never used 100% alpaca before. I'd only used wool alpaca blends, which I knew that I really liked. But what I didn't realize about alpaca is that it has very little to no memory. So if you are relying on things blocking out, you can't really trust it to do that and hold it. So although it does block to kind of make the fabric more uniform, you can't really do any adjustments to the fit through blocking, which I think only came back to bite me because of the nature of this pattern. I think my primary concern about the pattern was the fact that obviously because it is all intarsia, sleeves, front, back, you know, on the whole body, there is no room for adjustment and alteration if you have a particular fit in mind. And combined with the slightly misinformed yarn choice, it meant that it just didn't really come together in the way that I'd hoped. And there was no fixing some of the fit preferences that I might have had. So especially with the sleeves, they are very, very, very tapered, which is not my personal favourite, but I found that when I'm wearing it, it doesn't bother me as much as I thought it might. If I were to make it again, I'd definitely do fewer sleeve decreases or less rapid sleeve decreases, because I think they would make the world of a difference. But I do remember also thinking that the pattern writing was not as good quality as it maybe should have been, especially for something which has been so meticulously tested and, you know, technically edited and things like that. So I think there were quite a few parts of the pattern which were incredibly confusing. And I think if you're thinking of making this, I definitely recommend reaching out to people who already have done to see if they have any advice or maybe clarification if there are any parts of the construction which are a little bit confusing. And although I have my issues, I still love it. I just think the design is genius, and I love all of Deegan's patterns, to be honest. And I'm also very, very excited because I believe there's a new one coming out, which is the tulip sweater, and 100% I'm going to make it. You know, yes, I had a bad experience on this, but I'm definitely going to use it as a teaching moment and just put more time and care into the planning and some of my choices around the project whenever I knit the new one, which hopefully will be this year. As soon as it comes out, it's going on my queue, don't care.
You have to catch me first, I'm like a whippet.
And I'll be able to sort of implement some of the things that I learned, hopefully, in making that a better experience. But you know what? I still stand by this. This is one of the greatest things that I own, and I'll still wear it to death for many, many years to come. I hope that was a bit of an interesting insight. I know there are quite a lot of pieces there, so it might have been very overwhelming, and I am apologizing now if that was a really long video. But I just sort of thought it's a shame that I am relatively new to YouTube, and I feel like there's a lot in my wardrobe that you just haven't had the opportunity to see. So I wanted to do a little quick roundup. This is in place of what I made in 2024, you know. It's what I made in my whole life ever. So I'm excited this year to add to this collection. This pile is going to keep growing and growing and growing. We already have a couple of things which are off the needles, which I'll hopefully be able to give some updates on in the next few weeks. I am actually going away over Easter weekend, but I am not going to promise anything, but I'm hoping that I might take you with me and maybe do some little travel knitting snippets, depending on what I get up to. But if you have any time off over Easter, I hope you have a lovely time. I hope the weather is warm, and I hope you are stress-free and can enjoy the bank holidays if you have bank holidays. I know not everywhere does. But yeah, I hope everyone is having a wonderful time with their projects, and as usual, I just want to know what you're working on. Let me know if you have any questions about anything that I've made. Maybe you're thinking of making these things, maybe you're in the progress of making these things, and if you need any advice or tips or you have any comments, then they're always welcome. I think I'm very lucky that my comments are always so wonderfully positive and supportive, and I do love reading them. So have a wonderful week. I'll hopefully see you when I'm back from my holidays, and then I might have some more updates on a couple of whips from the last podcast episode too. Fingers crossed. Have a lovely rest of your week.